The day the market lost its mind. The screens were bleeding red. On Wall Street, traders screamed into phones that no longer promised hope, just damage control. Sweat-soaked collars. Voices cracked from hours of shouting. Monitors flickered with numbers falling faster than anyone could track. And across the country, in a quiet suburban home, a man named Robert sat frozen on the couch. 63 years old, retired for just 2 months. He had spent 4 decades building a nest egg he believed was safe, diversified, sensible. But that morning it wasn't. The market had opened with a thud. No gradual decline, no warning, just a plunge. CNBC was broadcasting live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. The camera caught a young trader dropping his headset, hands gripping his head like he was trying to hold his brain together. Behind him, another broker mouthed the words, "Oh my God," before disappearing behind the swarm of chaos. Robert's wife, Ellen, stood in the kitchen, gripping her coffee so tight her knuckles turned white. The coffee had gone cold. The words on the screen blurred together. Worst day since Black Monday. Bear Stearns collapse. Panic selling. Bank runs possible. Robert stared at his retirement account on his laptop. It was down 37% in a single week. $280,000. Gone. The living room felt like it was shrinking. His heart pounded like it was trying to escape his chest. The world outside remained calm. Birds chirped, kids laughed on bikes, but inside, time had collapsed into this single suffocating moment. "Should we pull out?" Ellen finally whispered. Robert didn't answer, because he didn't know. No one did, not the experts who had once told him to ride out the volatility. Not the talking heads on TV, who were now visibly panicking, contradicting themselves by the minute. Not the bankers who had created the mess, but somehow still wore tailored suits and smiled on air. Down the street, his neighbour, a young father of 2, had just pulled his 401k entirely out of the market. He said he'd rather have what's left than lose everything. At the grocery store that morning, an elderly woman was crying in the canned food aisle because her pension fund had been tied to Lehman Brothers. This wasn't just numbers. It wasn't corrections or market dynamics. It was fear, primal, contagious fear, spreading like a virus from trading floors to breakfast tables, from hedge funds to retirement homes. And the decisions being made that day on Wall Street and Main Street were not rational. They were emotional, panicked. This was not a market governed by logic. It was a mirror reflecting millions of terrified human faces, all asking the same desperate question. What now? So pause for a second. Think back to that day. Ask yourself, was this really the behaviour of a rational system? Or was it the sound of human beings losing faith, all at once? The lie we were told: markets are rational. For decades we were told a comforting story, that markets are efficient, that prices reflect perfect information, that every boom, every crash, every rally had a logical explanation. Economists wrapped this belief in charts, formulas and theories. Professors called it the efficient market hypothesis. Investors clung to it like a life raft, convinced that with enough data they could predict the future. But then Morgan Housel stepped forward with a truth that shattered the illusion. The stock market, he said, is not a spreadsheet. It's a bar fight between optimism and fear. Not a clean algorithm, but an emotional battleground. Look closer and you'll see it. Markets don't move because of balance sheets. They move because someone got scared or greedy. They spike because of rumours. They collapse because of panic. The idea that markets are rational gave us a false sense of control. It told us that if we just followed the rules, the outcome would make sense. But what happens when millions of people act from emotion, not logic? What happens when fear spreads faster than facts? This lie the myth of rationality, has cost people their savings. It convinced retirees to stay invested when they couldn't afford another crash. It led young investors to throw money into bubbles, believing the market knows best. But markets don't know anything. They react. They overreact. They're built on human psychology, imperfect, irrational, emotional. We saw it in 2008 when investors sold everything out of raw fear. We saw it again in 2020 when panic over a virus turned the world's largest economies upside down in weeks. And we see it every day in meme stocks, pump and dumps, and speculative manias that have nothing to do with fundamentals. Believing the market is rational is like believing a crowd in a burning theatre will calmly file out one by one. They won't. They'll rush, push, scream, trample, because panic spreads faster than reason. Morgan Housel doesn't just challenge the old story, he exposes the cost of believing it, because when you expect reason and chaos, you freeze. You don't know what to do. Now, but once you understand the truth, that markets are emotional ecosystems, you stop chasing perfect models and you start preparing for imperfect behavior. The sooner you stop expecting logic, the sooner you start surviving panic in motion. What investors actually do. Her name was Lisa. 42 years old, divorced, 2 kids. She worked as a nurse in Minneapolis and had spent the better part of a decade building a modest retirement fund through steady contributions. She wasn't greedy. She wasn't trying to time the market. She just wanted safety, stability. In early 2020, she had $142,000 in her 401k. It was more money than she ever thought she'd have, and every dollar mattered. Then came March. COVID headlines, lockdowns. Markets started spiraling. 500 points down, then 1,000, then another 2,000. Lisa watched the numbers drop every morning on her phone before her shift at the hospital. She was already drowning in stress. Patients flooding in, masks rationed, death all around her, and now the money she counted on to protect her family was vanishing. She called her broker in a panic. "I can't do this," she said. "I need to move it to cash before there's nothing left." He told her to breathe. He said the market always recovers, but Lisa didn't want to hear logic. She wanted control. She needed certainty, so she clicked the button herself. Sold it all. March 20th, 2020. The market bottomed that same day. In the weeks that followed, the market began to recover. Rapidly. By August, it had erased the losses. By the next year, it was hitting new highs. Lisa stayed in cash, scared to re-enter, ashamed she hadn't waited. Morgan Housel tells these stories not to shame, but to reveal a deeper truth. In The Psychology of Money, he explains, you can be wrong half the time and still make a fortune if you let your gains run and cut your losses. But when fear takes over, most people cut their gains and lock in their losses. This is what panic looks like. It isn't just some abstract force. It's millions of people like Lisa trying to feel safe. And that instinct overrides every spreadsheet, every financial plan, every rational forecast. Housel describes markets as emotional feedback loops. One person sells because they're scared. Others see that drop and panic too. Before long, everyone's looking at everyone else, trying to figure out what's safe. But safety doesn't come from information, it comes from emotion. And when emotion spikes, a logic vanishes. It's not that humans make markets irrational as an exception. They are the market. And humans don't act like computers when they're scared. They act like humans. That's why crashes happen faster than rallies. That's why people sell at the bottom. That's why bubbles inflate, burst, and then repeat again and again. Because fear travels fast. And in the markets, panic isn't a glitch in the system. It is the system in motion. In moments of volatility, we don't want to be smart. We want to be safe. And so we run. Not toward the truth, but toward the illusion of safety in the crowd. That's why bubbles grow and bursts feel like betrayal. Because no one thinks they're part of a stampede until the dust settles and they realize they never saw where they were going. The crowd doesn't think, it reacts. And when you follow blindly, you don't just risk your money, you risk losing yourself in the panic. Your reality check. Emotional investing has a cost. Let's be honest. How many of your financial decisions were actually about money? And how many were about emotion? Think about it. Did you ever buy into a stock just because everyone else was talking about it? Did you stay in too long because you were afraid of missing out? Or worse, did you sell at the bottom, not because it made sense, but because you couldn't handle the fear anymore? This isn't about intelligence. It's about impulse. That knot in your stomach when markets dip. That rush when your portfolio spikes. That envy when someone posts their crypto gains or shows off their passive income. All of that shapes what you do with your money, whether you admit it or not. Be honest with yourself. Have you ever opened your investing app just to feel something? Have you checked your balance more during bull runs, hoping to validate your self-worth? Or stayed silent during a crash, pretending that ignoring the loss makes it go away? That's the emotional cost of investing, and it adds up fast. Morgan Housel put it this way: controlling your emotions is harder than mastering any financial strategy, because most of the danger in investing doesn't come from the markets. It comes from us, from impatience, from insecurity, from the belief that we're missing out, falling behind, or not doing enough. So pause for a second. Ask yourself, are your financial decisions really grounded in logic, or just reactions to fear, greed, or comparison? Are you investing for your future or for validation? You're not alone. Everyone feels it, but the ones who survive, who actually build wealth, are the ones who learn to recognize it. Awareness is your first defense. It's the moment you stop chasing what feels good and start doing what works. You don't need perfect timing or genius stock picks. You need emotional clarity. You need to know when to step back, breathe, and ask, am I doing this because it's right or because I'm scared? You can't erase fear, but you can stop letting it control your portfolio. This is your turning point. Not of numbers, but of mindset. Because once you see the trap, you don't have to fall for it again. Markets reflect us. That's the problem and the answer. Markets aren't broken. They're working exactly as expected because they don't run on math alone. They run on us, on our fears, our hopes, our mistakes, the volatility, the bubbles, the crashes. They're not glitches in the system, and they're mirrors, showing us what we're really like when money's on the line. Morgan Housel said it best. You don't need to understand the market nearly as much as you need to understand yourself. That's the truth most investors miss. They study charts, trends, forecasts, trying to outsmart a system that's really just a reflection of collective emotion. The danger isn't out there, it's in here, inside our minds, our reactions, our blind spots. But here's the good news. If we are the problem, we can also be the solution. The moment you accept that markets reflect human behavior, not perfect logic, you stop fighting reality and you start managing it. You start building systems that protect you from yourself. You stop chasing highs and start planning for survival. You stop panicking and start understanding. So if this hit home, if you're starting to see the myth for what it is, drop a comment right now. I see the myth. Make it your public line in the sand. A moment of clarity in a system built on noise. Because the more you understand your own irrationality, the more rational your decisions become. And that's how you stop being a victim of the market and start becoming its quiet master. The rational myth collapses when logic fails. Tom was a quiet man, engineer by trade, methodical, precise, numbers-driven. He had always believed in logic. Believed that if you ran the numbers, followed the data, you'd be fine. In 2007, Tom was preparing for retirement. He had saved diligently, nearly $600,000 tucked away in a diversified portfolio. He trusted the system, the models, the advisors. But when the storm hit in 2008, none of that seemed to matter. In just months, a third of his portfolio was gone. Another few weeks, half. He didn't sleep. He stopped checking his account, but he knew what was happening. Quiet. Still, he held on, trying to be the rational investor the textbooks said he should be. Until one morning in October, he cracked, turned on the news, saw a commentator say, "This could get worse than the Great Depression." That was it. He sold everything. He told himself he was protecting what was left. He told himself he'd re-enter when things were more stable. But things didn't wait. The market bounced back, slowly at first, then fast. And Tom missed it. By the time he tried to re-enter, he was buying back the same stocks he'd sold at a higher price, not because he was stupid, but because he was scared. Morgan Housel puts it bluntly. We're not machines. We're emotional beings trying to make sense of chaos while being bombarded by fear and noise. Another woman, Dana, had the opposite problem. She froze. March 2020, watching the market crash. She did nothing, not because she was following a plan, but because she was paralyzed. She didn't buy the dip, didn't sell either, just watched, stunned. Months later, when the market was up again, she felt something worse than fear, regret. This is how the myth of rationality breaks. Not in grand academic debates, but in quiet, private moments of shame. Moments when people realize they aren't ready. Not emotionally, not mentally. The story we've been sold, of perfect logic and cool-headed investing, has a fatal flaw. It ignores what it feels like to watch your life savings bleed out. It assumes we're all capable of perfect detachment while the world burns. But that's not how humans work. And that's the point. These people didn't fail because they were dumb or careless. They failed because they were human. They failed because no one warned them that markets don't test your intelligence. They test your nerve. They failed because the illusion of control blinded them to the emotional chaos ahead. The myth of rational markets doesn't just fall apart when the data doesn't add up. It collapses in living rooms, on phones, in moments when fear takes the wheel. And in those moments, logic isn't loud enough to be heard. The psychology of crowds, why herds always run blind. Picture a stampede. It starts with one animal spooked by a sound in the grass. Then another runs, then dozens, then hundreds, not because they saw danger, but because others ran first. Now imagine that stampede on Wall Street. But instead of hooves, it's mouse clicks. Instead of dust, it's panic selling or skew. Instead of predators, it's fear of being the last one out. This is how herd behavior infects financial markets. It doesn't spread through reason. It spreads through emotion. When the market starts to drop, we don't ask, is this rational? We ask, what does everyone else know that I don't? That question alone, echoed millions of times, is enough to cause a crash. Morgan Housel writes, the crowd feels safest at the moment of maximum danger. Because when everyone's doing the same thing, it feels right, even if it's a sprint toward a cliff. Take the dot-com bubble. In the late 90s, no one wanted to miss the future. Startups with no revenue were trading like gold mines, and the crowd poured in, not because of logic, but because everyone else was getting rich. The few who raised alarms were mocked, until the crash, and suddenly that same crowd, once fearless, turned to panic. Mass sell-offs, portfolios halved in weeks, dreams erased. The same people who bought in for fear of missing out, sold out for fear of total ruin. This is the dance of the herd, lured by belonging, crushed by reversal. The urge to follow is hardwired. When we see others move, we assume they know something we don't. So we copy, because being wrong with everyone feels safer than being right alone. But markets don't reward safety in numbers. They punish it, because by the time the herd arrives, the opportunities are already gone, or the danger's already here. Crowd behavior gives us comfort, but it costs us clarity. It blinds us to fundamentals, to patience, to common sense.